going back to the politics, you talked about how, you guys are sort of in the middle and you balanced the spending reductions with the tax increases. And I've said often on this show, as a politician, you probably are not going to have a winning campaign slogan if you say, vote for me, I'll raise your taxes and cut your benefits. Even though as a policy, from a policy perspective, I think most, as these plans, all 7 plans show, you need to do a little bit of both. But, the political dynamics, particularly on, the primary level, where Republicans are worried about getting primaried by somebody to their right and the Democrats are worried about getting primaried by somebody to the left, it doesn't lend itself to that kind of compromise because you're seen as basically selling out your base or, giving up on your principles. So how do we finesse the politics of this? How do you get past the sort of normal partisan resistance of the two sides to demand that, if I could only do everything my way, if I could only do it on the spending side or I could only do it on the tax side, that'd be the perfect plan. But, I don't think that the politics are going to lend itself to us ever getting there where one side is going to control the House and the Senate and the White House for long enough to get everything done their way. And then the risk they run is if they were to get it done their way, then the next Congress, if things change, they could all be undone. So you have to figure out what is the bipartisan compromise that allows it to be a sustainable policy. And, we've been sort of, Bob and I have been watching this for a long time, and it just doesn't seem like we can ever figure out what's the right mix of politics and policy to get something done. What are your thoughts on just how you've, how do you divide up of these issues?
Well, it's a great question, Steve, and I think it requires a dual track here, and that dual track is doing some important behind the scenes work now, laying the groundwork with policymakers, their staff, other key stakeholders, while also being prepared for if and when we actually do reach a crisis point on the debt. And let me explain a little bit what I mean by each of those tracks. So. We've given a lot of thought recently at BBC, and we'll be doing more of this work in the months ahead. So I'd encourage folks to, as you mentioned earlier, Bob, keep an eye on our website, bipartisanpolicy.org. We'll have a lot more content on this in the coming months, especially as we get closer to election season. It is not enough for policymakers to acknowledge that our debt is rising and that poses economic and budgetary challenges for the nation, and right now, and it will for years, decades to come. Unfortunately, that hasn't been enough to spur lawmakers in either party to action. And right, in some senses, it sometimes feels like we're going backwards when you have both. Well, at least as long as President Biden was still in the presidential race, you had both presidential nominees saying, "Hey, we're not going to touch Social Security," even though we know a crisis is coming in the years ahead. But I think where we have some potential here is to help policymakers and their staff and other stakeholders identify that if you care about some other issue, some other challenge, housing affordability, clean energy, national security, you should also care about the debt. So I think that's one track. And then the other track is having plans like these so that if and when we reach a crisis point, if treasury markets start to experience that crisis level, that we can that we can be engaged with thoughtful ideas like those included in these 7 proposals at the right time.